you ready?
Yeah.
Yes!
This is the Ross Kaminsky Show.
You're a great American.
Now, Ross Kaminsky.
Come on, man.
On Denver's talk station, 630 KHOW.
All right, good morning. Happy Monday. I'm Ross. Thanks so much for being here, and it is so great to welcome back to the show one of our very favorite guests and one of my favorite people, my friend KT McFarland. Longtime foreign policy hand going all the way back to the incredible opportunity to work with Henry Kissinger. I love saying that because it's so awesome. I hope it doesn't make you feel old, KT. I'm just really jealous. I'm just really jealous.
Ross, I am old. It's okay.
All right. So first of all, I mentioned to you by email that I might ask you about domestic politics, and you wrote back, ugh. So that made me laugh out loud like a minute ago. I guess there's a reason you and I kind of love foreign policy.
Well, but here's, because I'm old, I've been through enough of the domestic policy cycles. And I wrote about this in my book, where it's just really predictable. The Democrats, to get in office, to stay in office, they borrow money from countries that don't like us to spend money on programs we don't need to keep in office politicians who don't deserve it. And so that's what we're doing now. It's just that they're doing it at just stunning levels and at stunning speed, is to borrow and spend money on programs that are going to really, within not too long a period of time, probably within 18 months, are going to cause enormous economic problems for the country.
KT's prior book, Revolution, Trump, Washington, and We the People, still resonates significantly with what we're going through now. And I got to say, I love that line. Can you say that again, KT? Borrowing money from... Go ahead. Do that again.
To come up with it, to say it the right way.
Yeah.
But what Biden and what the Democrats are doing is borrowing money from countries that don't like us to pay for programs that we don't need to keep politicians who don't deserve it in office.
You should be a writer.
Should be.
That's really good. All right, before we do more foreign policy, and we'll mostly avoid domestic, is your daughter in the Florida State Legislature?
Yeah, our daughter, we are in Sarasota, Florida. Our daughter, Fiona McFarland, is the new representative from Sarasota to the Florida State Legislature. And through her eyes, she's a reserve officer, lieutenant commander of the Navy Reserves, new mom, about to have another baby. And what I've observed through her in her last year or so in running in a Democrat district, which she won the good old-fashioned way by going door to door. She's a conservative, physically conservative Republican, won by 10 points, so won significantly over the Democrat. But what I've seen is sort of two things that are really interesting. One, she and others like her all across the country in congressional districts, in House and state Senate districts, won. And they won on even whatever happened on the national level, in the presidential. But these people have won all across the country, and it's the new Republican Party, and they're young, and they're conservative, physically conservative for sure, and they're Asian and Hispanic and black and female and veterans, and they're winning overwhelmingly in Democrat districts. So it gives me hope for the future, because it turns out actually America isn't nuts. That the majority of Americans really don't believe in cancel culture and the woke media mob and all the nuttiness that we're seeing. And the second thing that I've observed since she's been in Tallahassee in session is that the real action in the country, the real action in governance, the getting things done part of government, is not going to happen in Washington. Washington's only going to spend money on stupid stuff. It's going to happen in the state level. So in Florida, for example, she's sponsoring one of the most important data privacy legislation in the country. Florida Governor DeSantis is doing stuff about protecting Florida academic institutions, research institutions from penetration by the Chinese. So the tough actions are, in fact, being taken by probably a dozen states which are moving out to do that, and passing legislation which wouldn't have a prayer in Washington, because Washington is just so divided.
Okay, so how did the conversation go? I'll pretend I'm Fiona, hey, Mom,
Yeah.
I'm thinking about running for office. What do you think? She must have asked you.
Yeah, we talked about it, and the interesting thing is, so she went to the Naval Academy, married to a Naval Academy graduate as well, and he's in tech. She was in the Navy. She has a business degree, was in business, making scads of money at a big international consulting firm, and she said, I don't feel that I'm being fulfilled. I want to go back into service, and I think the best way to do it is to run for office. So then we talked about, where do you run for office? And she said, Mom, I've seen Washington my whole life, and I don't think they're getting anything done. So I want to run for the state office, the state government, and Florida being the sort of one of the most sort of cutting-edge, groundbreaking states in the country with legislation. And so I must say I really applaud it. And having gone to some of the sessions, so we've been in Tallahassee a bit, where I've gone to some of the sessions that she's participating in, committee sessions, drafting of legislation, watching it either on TV or in person, and they're really doing stuff. I mean, they're actually, this is not leaving it to some big bureaucracy to administer. It's the actual representatives of the districts in Florida are making serious decisions that are affecting people's lives. They're not just spending money and raising taxes, which is all that happens in Washington.
Does your daughter have the skill set to be governor one day?
Oh my gosh! You know what? We're getting way ahead of her.
I know, but you could be a proud mom
She's
for a
only
moment.
been in office
I know.
for a
I
couple
know.
of months.
You know how it is. They're always
She's
looking for
very
the next
good.
new thing,
She's
right?
Very good. No, she's really very good, and it's being recognized by Governor DeSantis, who's called her one of the rising political leaders in the state. So it's all good.
Excellent. My special guest, KT McFarland, her book, Revolution, Trump, Washington, and We the People, is a really good read and well worth reading, even though Trump is now former President Trump. The book still applies. So I was hearing in the news, KT, that there are going to be what they're calling indirect talks between Washington and Iran and Tehran. I guess we're using the cities rather than the countries. And I want to know what you think about this. I mean, a lot of people talking about the Biden foreign policy being kind of weak overall. I don't think it's surprising that Biden's going to have this conversation with Iran, but what should we expect from it?
Yeah. There's a saying, Iran has never won a war, but they've never lost a negotiation. I mean, they have zero intention of giving up their nuclear weapons. And they'll now but they'll slither and slide their way into an agreement where they get what they want. They want the United States and the world to lift the penalties, the trade penalties, the sanctions, and they want a clear path to nuclear weapons. They're probably going to get both. And Biden will probably get what they want. They'll get bragging rights. They'll come up with some kind of a toothless deal, and then Biden and the former Obama people who are in the Biden administration will all claim it's just some great thing. And it's not, because the original Iran nuclear deal, it never stopped Iran's nuclear program. They pretended it did. And the Obama administration sold it as this great thing. We've stopped Iran's nuclear weapons program. No, it didn't. It only paused it temporarily. And the clock, meanwhile, has been ticking. And so that if they all re-enter the original Iran nuclear deal of 2015, I mean, Iran has a legal path to nuclear weapons within the decade. Mm-hmm. In addition, Iran has sanctions relief, economic investment will pour into Iran, so they'll have no incentive to change their evil ways. And in addition to that, China has just inked a deal with Iran to supply Iran with investment and technology and presumably help with their nuclear weapons program in exchange for Iranian oil. So it's all bad from our perspective. It's going to cause a nuclear arms race in the Middle East.
It's also worth noting, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, KT, but in that just horrendous Iranian nuclear deal, it didn't address their ballistic missile program. So even if you were inclined to believe Iran, and I'm not, but even if you were inclined to believe them that they paused some of the direct work on uranium enrichment and that sort of thing, there was nothing in the deal that even asked them to stop building their delivery systems so that when they did get a nuclear weapon, they could drop it on someone's head.
Yeah, I mean, and this is the other important thing, and the foolishness, I think, of the Biden administration, going back to the foolishness of Obama. You need two things. You need three things for a nuclear weapon, right? You need a blueprint, and you need a delivery vehicle somehow to get the nuclear weapon to wherever you want to send it. And you need the fissile material, the nuclear weapons material. And so Iran has never asked to stop the blueprint. It was never forced to stop the delivery vehicle, the missile.
Mm-hmm.
It was only forced to pause the development of nuclear weapons-grade material. And, and then the other thing is that Iran is the leading state sponsor of terrorism throughout not just the region, but the world. That was never addressed. So here's what's going to happen, is that the Biden administration, I just can't believe that these people ever negotiate with teenage children of their own, but they're saying that, well, we're going to go back to the nuclear deal, and it's all going to be so great. We're going to give Iran sanctions relief, and we're going to help them into the world economy, and they're going to pause their nuclear weapons program for a few years. Just the nuclear weapons part, not even the missile part, not the terrorism part. And then once we've gotten this deal, we're going to go back and have a second deal where they're going to stop their missiles and their... Come on, once you give up all your leverage, what incentive does Iran have to come back? Here's what I think is going to happen. So they're starting to meet on Tuesday, and Iran has said, we'll go to the meetings, but we're not going to be in the same room with the Americans. We're going to be in the same room with the Europeans, and then the Europeans can be with the Americans, but we're not going to meet directly with the Americans.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what will happen is that the Iranians will give some major concession. In other words, they're willing to walk 12 steps into another room to see Americans face to face. And what will America give up for that privilege? We'll probably give up some sanctions, some of the penalties, give up some of our leverage for the mere honor of having Iran walk a couple of steps into the next room. And everybody will claim it as a great victory. It won't be that they'll claim it as such.
I got to say, KT, you and I have been around politics for long enough that we know better than to take stuff personally and to get too angry at things, because if you did, you'd be angry all the time, and neither one of us is an angry person. I don't think I've ever been as angry about a foreign policy decision of our country as about the Iran nuclear deal, and that felt as close to me to treason, and it's not a term I throw around lightly, as any decision by our government that I had ever seen.
Well, let me just go back. So in 2014 and 15, when the Obama administration was trying to negotiate with Iran, I was at a VIP meeting. I was a private citizen, political analyst, foreign policy expert, but I was at a private meeting with the Council on Foreign Relations where the president of Iran, Rouhani, was being interviewed. And there were, 36 VIP people like me in the room. And at the same time, it was in New York, and at the same time there were meetings that then Secretary of State Kerry was having with the Iranians, and just, 10 blocks away. And so we're in the middle of our meeting with Rouhani, and all of a sudden the doors of the meeting of the big conference open up, and in strides a breathless John Kerry saying, I've just come from the negotiations with the Iranians, and they've agreed to sit down with us and negotiate. And, of course, every eye in the room was turned to John Kerry. I didn't look at John Kerry. I went and looked back at Rouhani, the Iranian president, to see what was... And he had the biggest smile on his face, like the cat that had just swallowed the canary. And I thought, John Kerry, don't you realize you've been set up? This was a plan all along. They planned to have this dramatic breakthrough that you could rush heroically to say, we've gotten the Iranians to this major concession. They're going to come over and sit at the table with us to negotiate. I thought, oh boy, this doesn't spell much for this deal. I'm sure that the deal will be even more disadvantageous to the United States than anything. And it was.
And it was. Funded lots and lots and lots of terrorism. And I don't know what else. It certainly didn't help the Iranian people. And I, by the way, I'd like to help the Iranian people, even though it's not my job to help the Iranian people with American tax dollars or whatever. I was actually in Iran when I was a kid, and better than I do. It's a very highly educated country, and a lot of young people who don't hate the West, dominated by the Islamo-fascist, the apocalypse, 12th Imam is coming sort of people. And gosh, if there's a country in the world that needs regime change, it's them.
Yeah, and that's the irony of it, is that Iran has a lot of problems right now. The Iranians have a lot of problems. They're dealing with COVID, they're dealing with an economic disaster, et cetera, but they don't blame America. They blame the mullahs. So I always thought that if we could pressure the Iranian economy to the point where the Iranian people, as you point out, they're one of the most literate populations in the world. They're computer savvy. They have a very large young population. Just push it over the edge, and they'll say, "Hey, mullahs, get out of the way. We want to deal with the West in a way that we're treated equally." And yet, while that was what we were attempting to do in the Trump administration, push the Iranian population to the edge where they take regime change into their own hands. Meanwhile, we now find out that the former Obama officials who are now in the Biden administration, they were busy scurrying over to meet with the Iranian officials during the Trump administration saying, "Oh, don't cut a deal with Trump. Don't worry about it. We're going to be back in. Just bide your time. Wait it out." And they were undercutting the Trump administration at every step. So it's no surprise to me that here they are rushing into yet another flawed deal with Iran, which the result of which is only going to be a nuclear arms race in the Middle East. Scariest place in the world, dealing with nukes.
Yeah, well, that's what you get when you give foreign policy authority to someone as dumb as John Kerry. But here we are. We need you in that job, not that the Biden administration wants anybody who actually understands the real world. My special guest every month, my good friend KT McFarland. Her book is called Revolution, Trump, Washington, and We the People. KT, thanks so much again for your time, and go Navy.
Beat Army every year. Thanks, Ross.
All right, we'll see you. Bye, KT. All right. I'll tell you what we're going to do next. Joe Biden, we were just talking about, and his party, they mislead or lie all the time about economic issues. And one of the biggest lies is that the Trump tax reform didn't help ordinary or working class Americans. I've got some unbelievable information for you that you really need to know right after this.
True international effort to pressure.
This is Denver's Talk Station with Ross Kaminsky now. Dan Kaplis today at 4, 630 KHOW, Denver.